Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are going to build a money tracker app. So some kind of expenses and income budget planning app. And we are going to use MERN stack. So MongoDB, Express, React and Node.js. React for the front-end part, Express for the backend and Mongo for database. Right, but we are starting with an empty IDE here and empty terminal, and as you can see I have only empty folder here, empty directory in my editor. And the first thing is that we are going to start with a React app. So we'll build some front end, some styling, and then we will go to API endpoints. So let's start by creating a React app in the same directory. So I will do yarn create app and dot here, so it will install React app in the current directory. So yarn create React app should be like this. Right, now when it's installed we can do yarn start to start our React app. And as you can see inside this directory we have now our React app installed. So now we can open localhost 3000. So now we have our app open here. I will hide my terminal and let's go to source and app.js. And from here, I will start by removing all of this and I will just return an empty div, and I can remove this logo as well. Now we have just a white page. And now let's start by putting some structure to our HTML. So here we have a div. Maybe instead of div, we can put a main as an HTML element. And well, the first thing is that we need a balance. So let's say we will put it inside an H1, and let's say that our balance will be $400 and 0 cents. But those cents I will put them inside a span so we can make them smaller. All right, this works. I will make it a little bit bigger. All right, so we will have a balance. Underneath we will have a form for adding new transactions, and under the form we will have all the transactions that we have added. Right, so we have balance. Now the next part will be a form. I will remove this action, we don't need this. And inside this form we need 3 inputs. The first one will be for name. The second will be for date time. So we can define when the transaction has taken place. And the third one will be for description. So let's say it will be text as well. Right, I will add some placeholders. Oops, the first placeholder will be, let's say, plus 200 new Samsung TV. And placeholder for this will be just a description. All right, and now I would like to put the description on a separate row. So those first inputs, I will put them inside one div, and the third one will be on separate div like this. And this one will have some class name like description, and the first part will be, let's say we will have a class name basics, like basic information about it. And here we will just fix new Samsung TV, $200, maybe it should be more. Right, but now we have our form, and for the form we also need a button. So let's create a button, and let's say that the label will be add new transaction like this, and it will be type of submit. So this one will submit our form when we click on it. Right, so we are done with our form. And now the last part will be actually transactions. So let's put them inside the div with class name transactions so we can access it in our CSS later. And well, let's define our first transaction. So we will have some kind of styling. Inside each transaction, a transaction will be a row, and inside each transaction I need a name, a description under the name. It will be on the left side, and on the right side I want to have the price and the date underneath. So we'll have 2 things on the left side, 2 things on the right side. So I will maybe do just div with class name left and div with class name right. Right, and in div left, let's do div with class name. It will be new Samsung TV, and underneath div with class name description, and let's say description will be it was time for new TV, and div with a class name right. Let's see, on the right side we should have a price, so let's do div with class name price, and say it will be, I don't know, $500, and div with class name date time. And inside, let's say we'll have a date like this. It will be 18th and 1545. All right, so now we have one transaction, and I think maybe we can just copy this transaction, and so we'll have some more content. So now we have 3 transactions. Now let's add some styling so it will look better. On the top of our app.js, we have this app CSS that we can reuse. Let's remove everything, and let's see. First, we had this main element, so we can maybe center the content of the app. So let's say the max width will be 360 pixels, and the margin will be 0 auto, so it will be centered. Right, and then we have, well, let's start maybe with a background, because I would like to have a darker colors, like dark mode for this app, because I don't like the bright colors. So above the main, I will add also body, and I will add the background color of this one. It's almost dark, almost black, and now let's also define a default color for text, which will be DDD, so almost white. Yes, and now I think the next part will be actually the balance. So let's do H1, and for H1 we need to do text align center, and let's make it pure white. So the color FFF, yeah, so it's brighter, and I think this will work. Maybe let's remove margin from this H1, and let's define it ourselves. So we have on the main element we have margin 0 on the top and the bottom. Let's maybe change it to 20 pixels, maybe more. Let's do 50. Yeah, maybe that's too much. Let's do 30. All right, and under H1 we want to have between H1 and between the form we want to have some spacing. Maybe we can add this on our form. Let's do form, and let's do margin top of let's say 20 pixels. Yes, and now let's start our inputs. So inside form we have inputs, and how do we want to style it? We want to make them width of 100%. Let's start with this. All right, but now the first 2 inputs should be like 50-50 in the first row, and then the description should be 100%. So I will comment this out for now, and this is what I want to achieve, but the description should go all the way to the right side. I'll quickly go back to app.js to see how it looks like. Well, we have a div with class name basics, and then we have div with class name description. All right, I think that I can put back this 100%, but inside form, inside the div with class name basics, we will do display of type flex. So those two will be 50-50 in percentage. Now, as you can see, we have small problem here that those two take less space than this one here. Let's inspect and see why. So we have div basic that goes this, then we have this div description, and as you can see, the input inside is bigger than the div above. So to fix it, I will define that on all elements I will do box sizing, border box, and now it's fixed. This one changes how the width should be calculated. If we don't have it, it will calculate the width of the input by making it 100%, and on top of this it will add borders and padding, so it could be actually bigger than 100%. By changing this border box to border box, it will calculate the width to 100%, including the borders and everything. Right, but now we have our inputs and they shouldn't be white. So let's do background color to be transparent. Yes, and the color of the text should be, let's say, DDD. Yes, and now let's fix this weird border. So let's do a border. I will do 2 pixels solid, and the border color will be 30, 31, 3D. Yes, and now I would like to have add some spacing. So first, between those two, so inside the basics, I will add a gap for our flex display of, let's say it will be 5 pixels gap. And now also between those two, or the first run and the second, so on the basics, I will add a margin bottom of 5 pixels as well. Yes. And now for the input, it would be nice to add some padding. So let's do padding of at least 2 pixels on the top and the bottom, and let's say 5 pixels on the sides. Yes, that's much better. Let's add also some border radius, and let's say it will be 5 pixels. Yes, that looks nice. Now, as you can see that the default placeholder for this datetime is really white, so I would like to change it. Let's see. Let's do that form input of type datetime local. The color inside should be, let's say it should be 555. Maybe it should be brighter. Let's do 777. Now let's style our button. So let's do form button, and let's make it width of 100%. And let's add some margin from the top, margin top of 5 pixels here as well. And let's remove the border 0. Let's add the rounded corners, so border radius of 5 pixels here as well. Let's add some padding of 5 pixels. And I think this will work for now. Maybe we should change the background color. So let's do this. Let's say it will be DDD. Yeah, so it's a little darker. And now I think it's time for our transactions. So let's start with transactions div. And this is the div that holds all the transactions. I will just add a margin top of, let's say, 5 pixels. So we have a little bit of spacing from the button. All right, now for each transaction, div transaction, what do we want to do? Inside this div transaction, inside each transaction, let me see. Inside each transaction, we have div with class name left and class name right. So we have 2 divs. So, and they should be on the opposite sides. So let's do that display should be flex, but not on the transaction. Yes, and that's much better. And we want to add some spacing. So let's say that the padding from the top and the bottom will be 5 pixels, and on the sides it will be 0. So we have some spacing, right? And now we have div left here and div right here. Let's add some gap in between. So this part should go all the way here to the right side. So let's do justify content and space between. That's much better. And now we can focus on the details. So first, inside the transaction, we have a div with class name. Let's say that the font size will be 1 point or just 1 rem, maybe 1.2. So it will be a little bigger. Yes, and now div transaction. Under the name, we have div with description. So do div description, and let's make it smaller. So let's do font size 0.8 rem should be good enough, and maybe even smaller. Let's do 0.7. Well, I think the name can be much smaller. Let's do 1 rem. Yeah, I think this will work. Right, so I think the name is okay for the description. Maybe we can make it darker a little bit. So let's do a color, and let's say it will be AAA. So more grayish, maybe even more. Let's do 888. Yes, that's good. Now for the right side, let's do div with class name right, I want to do text align to the right side. And now for the div with class name price, well, when it comes to prices, I would love to have them green and red, depending if it's income or an expense. So I'll go back to app.js, and let's say that the first Samsung TV, it will be minus 500, and on the price we'll add red class name. Then we will have, let's say that the next robot will be gig job, new website for someone, and it will be plus 500 or maybe plus 400. And let's say that the third will be iPhone, that we bought an iPhone, and well, it's let's say it will be minus $900, and the price will be red here as well. Right, now let's add some class names for the price. The price that should be green. Let's say that the color will be 1C1. Yes, and now let's go back to see price red. Here should be price green. Yes, and now for div price red, let's do color. It will be C11. Yeah, and now I think this looks much better. Now for div with class name inside the transaction, of course, div with class name datetime. I would like this datetime to be same sizing as the description. So I will just copy this part. I will now put it here. Yeah, and I think this looks much better. Now I would like to have a lines between the transactions. So div transaction, let's add the border top, 1 pixel solid, and well, let's use the same border color we use here. So let's see, we have input border color here. Let's use the same like this. I just need to add hashtag here in the beginning, and now we have lines here between. And I would like to remove the first line here, so it will look a little bit better there. Div transaction first child should have no border top 0. Yes, that's better. Now maybe more spacing here between transactions and the button. So let's maybe do 10 pixels or maybe 15. I think 10 will be good enough. All right, so I think that the styling is done. So now it will be nice to make this form functional. And let's add our first API endpoint so we can put new transactions to a database. So first, let's go back to our app.js and let's make our form functional. So for all those inputs, we need to add a state. So we'll have the values inside our React app. So it's the const, and now the first will be name and set name equals use state. Default will be empty string. And now we can do on the first input value equals name, and let's put those inside separate rows. And now on change equals, and with the event we want to do set name event target value. So now this one should work. Yes. Now let's fix the same for this one and this one. So 2 more states, const date time set date time, date time equals use state default empty string, and the last one will be for description, set description use state default empty string. And now let's do value equals datetime, and on change event set datetime event target value. I'll put them in separate rows on change type. And now this one, let's do the same, value equals description, and on change set description on event target value. I'll put them inside the separate rows so it will be easier to read. And now our inputs should be functional. So now let's add on click on this button, or maybe rather on submit on this form. So we have this form here. Let's add on submit, and let's call our function maybe handle submit. Yeah, simple as this. This can be even called add new transaction. doesn't really matter. Maybe we can make it to add new transaction. Now let's define this function here, function add new transaction. And what this function should do, it should take all the state and it should send it to a backend. So we don't have any backend yet, so we need to create it. Here inside our root directory, I will create a backend inside a directory called API. So we have our API, and inside Money Tracker, we'll have our React app. But even inside Money Tracker, we'll have another directory called API. And inside this API directory, we will have our Express app for backend. So let's do a new file here. And let's start with index.js. And well, first we need to install Express. So we'll open a new tab in my terminal. And I will just do yarn add Express. So now we can use Express inside API index.js. So let's do const express equals require express. Yes. And now we need to define our app. So let's do const app equals just express. We need to call it the function. And now we have that we can define a test API endpoint. Let's say it will be /API/test. And now here let's put an arrow function like this, but the params will be request and response. And now we can use request and response to say, let's say response JSON test OK. Yeah. And we have our test endpoint. Now we just need to do that our app will listen on port. Let's see, our React app is listening on port 3000. Let's say that 4000 will be port for our backend app, Express app. Yes, and this should work. So inside my terminal, I will maybe start this app. Let's say with just node index. No, not here. I'm inside Money Tracker. I need to go inside the API. So let's do cd API and now node index.js. Well, it looks like 4000 is already in use. So I will take 4040. Let's try again. And it looks like it works. Now let's do localhost 4040/API/test. And now we got test OK. So everything works. And one thing is when I change this to test OK2 and I refresh here, I still get test OK because we need to restart our Express app because the index file changed. I can do Ctrl+C and start this again, but it will be much better to use node.mon with index.js. So now every time I change something here to test3, for example, I just need to reload the browser because this part reloads automatically with when you use node.mon. Right, so now let's see. We have our form and we need an endpoint for posting a new transaction. So let's say that this endpoint will be a post request to /API/transaction. Yes, and here as always we'll have an arrow function and we need here to grab request and response. And inside the request we will have all the data. Let's say that for now it will be just response with JSON, and inside this JSON we will put all the request body. Yeah, and now let's try maybe to send it. Let's go back to our app.js and well, let's send it to our backend. So I think the easiest way, I will hide the terminal, will be to use fetch function. And first we need a URL. Let's say we'll define URL here as a constant to our API endpoint. But how we should know what is the URL? In our example, it's 4040, but the thing is that on the server, it could be different. So we need to have a settings file like .env. So we can tell the app what is the base URL. So inside our money tracker, I'll create a new file called .env for our React app. So we will have some settings for our React app. And the first will be React and API URL, and here we will put HTTP localhost 4040/API. I'm starting those names with React app, so there will be public for React app in the front end. Now let's go back to app.js and let's see. I will comment out this fetch for now, and inside our URL, let's start by putting process.env.react app API URL. And now let's maybe do console log to see if it works. I will open console in my browser, and let's see if I click this add new transaction. Well, it just refresh. The problem is that when we submit this form, the default action is to use get params and redirect. This is the default behavior for our form. So we can actually grab the event object and we can do prevent default to prevent it. Now let's try again. Let's put maybe test here. We get undefined. Well, maybe we just need to restart our app. So Ctrl C here. Let's do yarn start again on our React app. Let's do here test again. Now we have our URL here, but we need to make it a little bit longer because we need to add the plus and /transaction because this will be our endpoint for posting new transaction. So now we can use our fetch and we have our URL here. Now we need to add some options for our fetch. The method will be post. I know it should be, let's see, method should be maybe post with capital letters. And next we need to add some headers. So we need to tell that content type will be application JSON. So our app will know that we are sending JSON. And what else? We need to send a body, so all the data. And for this, we need to use JSON stringify. And here, let's put an object of name, description, and timestamp. Like this. Sorry, not timestamp, datetime. Right, after the fetch is done, we will do then to handle the promise. We will get the response. And with this response, let's use it inside arrow function here. With this response, we need to run JSON function, and this is a promise as well. So we need to run then and another arrow function here. But inside this, we get a param that is actually our JSON data. So we can do just maybe console log, and let's say it will say result and we'll print our JSON. Now let's maybe test it. Let's see, we get an error and let's see. Okay, by accident I have imported a response from Express here that we don't need. All right, now let's see. If I hit this add new transaction button, we got an error. Let's see, inside network, we got an error about course. To fix it, we need to go to our API index and we need to allow our front-end app to talk with our backend app. And we need to add some course headers for this. So inside my terminal, I will open yet another tab. I will go, and now here I can do yarn add course to install course for Express. And now we can do just const course equals require course. And now we will just do app use and course. We need to call it a function here. Yes, and this should work. Now let's try again. I'll clear this network tab, add new transaction, and it worked. The previous empty, the payload is all right. The previous empty, let's see. I think this can be because we are not parsing the JSON here inside our app. So let's add another app use and let's do express JSON, and let's call it as a function like this. Now let's try again, add new transaction, and we get some previews, so we'll see what has been sent. Both payload, what we sent, and preview the response from the server. So that's really nice. So now we get all the information from our React app inside the request body. Now it's time to save it inside a database. For database, we are going to use Mongo database. You can install Mongo database on your local machine, or you can use any cloud service like AWS or Mongo Atlas. And I have Mongo installed on my local machine, but I always prefer to use an online instance. So I will open Mongo Atlas, and here I just need to log in. And now let's see, now we are logged in, and I will create a new project, and let's call this one Money Tracker as the next. Create project, and now let's build a database. And now here you can pick a free tier here, free plan. I think I will use this serverless. And there is no difference except that if the free database is not used for like 90 or 100 days, it will be deleted. So I will use this serverless because it's super cheap. It's like 10 cents for 1 million reads, and I don't want this database to be deleted. But you can use this, and as long as you use your app every month or once a month or something like this, one every second month, you should be fine. And even for testing purposes, if you're learning, this is really nice to use. But I will use this one, otherwise there's no differences. So serverless, and I don't need any backup, so let's take this one that is included for free. And let's see, yeah, I think we can just create the instance here. And yeah, now this is creating our database. So we can go to database access, and we need to create a new user. So let's say our username will be money, and let's auto-generate the password. I will copy the password, and I will put it, for now, I will put it here. I will change it later so you guys can't use it. And now let's see, the username will be money. Here we have the password, and we need to add a role so we can allow our user to access database. Let's see, read and write to any database. Yes, this should be fine. Yes, so we have our user. Now network access. And for now, there are no IP addresses that can access this. If you want only test locally, you can do this. Add the current IP address, so only your home IP address can access database. I will add IP address to add allow access from anywhere, because I will publish this website, deploy this website to the server, and I don't know actually what will be the server IP. So I will allow access from anywhere, and I will confirm this. Right, now our user is being created. Let's see our database. Our database is almost ready. So now, meanwhile, we can continue with our endpoint. Well, first, what do we want to do? We want to grab all the data from the request body. So it's the const, and let's grab name, description, and date time. We want to grab it from request body because this is object and it contains all of this. All right, what is the next part? Next, we want to put it inside the database, our database. So to connect to our database and to use our database, we will use a lib that is called Mongoose. This is the most popular lib for connecting to a Mongo database. So I will do here yarn add Mongoose, enter. So it will be installed. And the thing with Mongoose is that for every collection, every table, every collection, like for example, in our example for now with transactions, we need to define models. So inside our API, I'll create a new directory called models, and we will define our first model so we can access database. So let's do new file, and let's do transaction.js. And now let's define our transaction model. We need to start with a schema, so the structure of our model. So let's do a const transaction schema. This can be even with capital T, doesn't really matter. Transaction schema equals new schema, and we need to import schema from Mongoose, yes. And well, inside here, we need to define the schema. We will have a name that will be type of string, and it will be required true, and we will have this, let's say the same for description, but for date time we will have type of date. All of this should be required, and I think this should work. So we have our schema. Now we can define the model. So let's do const transaction model equals, and now model as the function. We need to import this one. So here at the top, as you can see, I have imported both model and schema. And now we call this model function with the name, that is transaction of our model. The name of our model will be transaction, and the second param will be just transaction schema. Right, we can just export this const from here, and I don't know if exporting here will work, but we can do it this way. Module exports equals just transaction model. All right, now let's go back to our API index.js, and we should be able to import our transaction model here. So the const transaction equals require, and here let's go to /models/transaction.js. Yes, and now before we can use our transaction model, we need to connect to the database first. So our database is ready here. First, let's use Mongoose to connect to our database. So inside our /API/transaction, let's use Mongoose, and this now Mongoose has been imported for me, and let's hit connect. Let's run connect on Mongoose, and we need to have URL to our database. So let's see, let's click connect here. Let's say we will use connect with your application. This is the URL. We don't want to just put it here. We want to have it inside the config file. But this time we will put this config file inside our API, because this config will be only for our backend. So let's do .env, and inside let's put Mongo URL equals and this. But as you can see, we need to put this password here. So let's grab our password that I have just pasted here. Let's put it here. Yes, and this should work. Now inside our API index, let's maybe comment this for now, and let's see, I will do just console log, and let's try to see process environment.mongo URL to see if we will have it. And let's see, inside my terminal, let's see, we get an error here on our backend. It's because we can't import for transactions like this. Let's go to transaction, and we can't import like this. We need to import another way. We need to import const mongoose equals require mongoose, and then let's do const schema from mongoose, and same with model. Right, now this should work. Let's see, let's go to API index.js, and let's see. Let's now maybe see if we will get this console log. If I hit a new transaction, we get some error. Because we are using response body and we don't have anything, it should be request here. Now let's try again. We get undefined. So this is actually undefined, and this is because we need to add another package for our Express so it can read the .env files, our config. So the app is called, the library is called .env. So let's do yarn at .env. Yes, and the only thing that we need to do is here somewhere at the top, let's do const, or maybe we don't even need the const. Let's just require .env, and we need to run config on this one. Now let's go back to our app. Let's try with a new transaction again, and we get the URL. So now this process environment Mongo URL includes this link. So now we can use it inside our Mongoose Connect. Let's do process environment Mongo URL, and we can get rid of this console log. Now the thing is, this Mongo Connect is an async function, so we need to add await or we would need to add .then. I think it would be much simpler with just await here, but it's red because we need to make this arrow function async then. So let's make it async, and now we can connect to our database this way with await. Right, so we connected to our database. We grab it here. We grabbed the information from the request body. Now we want to put it inside our transaction model. So let's do transaction, and here we will just call the function called create to create a new document inside our transaction collection. And let's see. And here we need to pass all the data. So we need to pass name, description, and datetime. Yes, and we can run await here as well. So it's the await, and the result of this will be actually our transaction, a new created transaction inside our database. So let's maybe call it transaction with capital T. You see, this is different than this. This is our model, and this is our object that is from the database. This is the schema and the model of the mongoose, and this will be result our transaction that we put inside database. So now maybe we can just print transaction inside response.json. Let's save this one, and now let's test. Let's hit add new transaction. We got an error. Datetime is required. Let's send some datetime, and I think will work. And same with description. Test, add new transaction, and let's see. Yes, we got an ID and other stuff. Now there's one thing I forgot. As you can see on the placeholder, we should have both price and the name. So we are displaying this separately. Here we have the price, and on the left side we have the name. So inside our transaction model, we need to add the price. So let's say it will be price, and the type will be actually number, and it will be required as well. So let's do required true. But now, every time we send this information to the backend, let's say inside payload, we are sending the name, description, datetime, but no price. And the thing is, from this, we need to grab both the name as the second part and the price as the first part. So let's go back to our app.js, and we need to split this name to be both name and the price. So let's see, here we have this JSON stringify, and we send all this data. I will put them inside separate rows, so it will be easier to read. And now, first we need to, from this state, we need to grab the price. How we can do this? Let's do this maybe somewhere here before we do the fetch. Let's say const price, and the price is the first part of the name until we get the first space. So let's do name split, and let's split with using space, and we want to grab the first part. So let's do index of 0. So we'll have the price that we can add here. But now the name will include both the price and the name, and we don't want to have the pricing. So let's say that the name will be actually name, but we will use substring on this, and we want this string to start from after the price. So the price length and +1. All right. Now let's see if we do plus 300, and let's say it will be Xiaomi phone. Let's pick a date here, add new transaction. Let's see what do we send here. Price plus 300, name, everything is fine. Right, so now let's see inside our database, or maybe before we do this, every time we send this, we don't want only to console log, we want also to clean the form. So after we get the response, we want to set name to empty string, we want to set datetime to empty string, and we want to set description to empty string as well. Now try again. response JSON. Let's hit add new transaction. We get an error. Do we? Let's see, add new transaction. And the transaction is pending. Let's see what happened inside our, here, I will restart our backend Express app. Let's try again now. Yeah, we got an error. Let's see. The price is required. Let's see, what do we send? Transaction price plus 300. Okay, but inside our API index, we are not grabbing this price and we are not sending it. So let's grab price here as well. And on create, we need to add this price thing. Right, and now let's try again. Add new transaction, and everything works. We got the ID, so that's cool. And we cleared the form. So that is nice. So now let's maybe check inside our database if we get all this data. So I will click here, browse collections. We have only transactions here. And as you can see, we have 2 transactions. Maybe we can, well, this should be actually minus 300. So for expenses, we should do minus 300 and for example, new bike. And let's say this and test, add new transaction. And for incomes, we should do plus 500. And let's say that a few days ago, we did a new website gig for let's say it was website for my uncle. Let's add new transaction and let's refresh inside our database to see them. Yeah, so we have a minus 300 new bike and 500 for website gig. Maybe we can remove those 2. Xiaomi phone, let's delete this one. And this test one, let's remove this one as well. Right, and so we have 2 documents inside our transactions. Now, the next part is actually that I would like to see them here. So to display them, we need 2 things. The first is an API endpoint, and the second is that we need to fix it so we can fetch it inside our React app. Let's start with our API endpoint, and here inside our API index.js, let's do that app on get. Let's say that the URL will be /API/transactions with it will be plural, and it will be a get request. Here, as always, we get request response, arrow function. And here, what do we want to do? We want to grab, first we want to connect to the database. Yes, and we need to make this one async here. Then we want to use our transaction model and grab everything. So let's do transaction, and we just want to find everything. So no specification here. What do we want to, if we want to find anything specific? No, we don't need to specify what we want to find. We just want to grab all of those. And we will put a wait here because I'm tired of doing .then. And here, let's maybe do const, and the result will be transactions equals this, await transaction find. So it will find all the transactions. And now we can maybe just do response JSON and all the transactions. Yes. And now maybe we can first test it. So let's see if we do API/transactions, we get all the transactions. Right. So now let's display them inside our React app. So let's go to app.js and let's see. When our app mounts, when it renders, we want to run something to fetch all the transactions. To do this, we will use effect. So I'll go maybe somewhere here at the top, and under use state, I will use effect. And this has been imported for me as well here from React. And now the first param will be arrow function, empty for now. And the second will be just empty dependencies, empty array. In this use effect, what do we want to do? We want to use fetch to call this URL and grab everything. Let's put the URL the same way we did it for new transactions. I'll add maybe some spacing, it will be easier to read, but the URL is actually transactions, and this would be a get request, not post. So we can do here just URL, and because the get is default for fetch, we can do just here then, and we get the response. And for the response, we can do then to run JSON and stuff like this. But maybe this time we can skip doing then. We can use await. So I will put this inside a separate function as the function called get transactions. Transactions, yes, and I'll put this. But no then, I will do just a const response equals await fetch URL, but we need to make this one async. And then with the response, we want to run JSON function. Here it's await as well. And the response of this will be just JSON data. And let's just now return this JSON. So we could actually do just return like this. Right. Now I by accident imported this response again. I don't know why. Right, but now let's see. Now we want to use this get transactions, and here maybe we can run then. And as you can see in get transactions, we should get the transactions, so the array of all the transactions. So let's do transactions arrow function here, and well, we want to save those transactions into state. So let's prepare our state. Transactions, set transactions, use state. Default will be an empty array. And here we can do just set transactions on transactions like this. And now maybe below the button, let's say under the button, I will print the amount of transactions just for now. Transactions length. So it's 2 because we have 2 transactions. Well, let's see. This could be actually simplified because we are using the same, and we are just using transactions to do set transactions. So we can actually do just set transactions here, and this should work as well. Yes. And now let's remove this print of transactions. And now here we have transactions, and well, I will remove those 2. We just need the one HTML structure for one transaction. And now let's see. Inside transactions, I want to first check if there's something inside transactions. So let's do transactions length is bigger than 0, and then let's do transactions map. And then for each transaction, we will do parentheses here. And let's see, for each transaction, I will do a div. And actually, I can just put this one. Yes, so we have now 2 transactions, but we need to replace those texts here. So first will be transaction name, and then we have a description here. So let's do transaction description, and then we have this price thing. So let's do transaction price, and now we need to fix this red and green thing. So I will remove this red. I'll make this string completed by React, and now I want to add something. Let's add space here. And now depending if the transaction price, or maybe put it like this, will be easier to read. Now here, if the transaction price is smaller than 0, then I want to have red, otherwise green. Yes, and this should work. Let's see why it doesn't. That's weird. Let's maybe console log our price. So let's do console log here, transaction price. I will open my console here. Everything looks fine. If it's smaller than 0, then let's do red. Let's see if we get the class names here. Yes, we get the class names, but we don't get the price class name. Right, I think I know why. Because the whole thing should be inside parentheses, like this. Now we get the prices. So now the colors do work. The last thing that we actually need here is the balance. So because we have all the transactions inside state, we can calculate the balance. So let's see, the balance is here. And well, first thing, I forgot to make those cents smaller. So I'll quickly go back to app CSS and let's search for h1. Let's do h1, and inside we have a span that we want to make smaller. So let's do font size of let's say 0.5 rem, and let's say that h1 font size should be 2 rem, maybe even bigger. Let's do 2.5 or maybe 3 rem. 2.5 should be good enough. And the cents should be just 1 rem, but they should be on the top. So let's do vertical align to top, but we need to push it from the top a little bit. So let's do display of inline block, and margin top, let's do 5 pixels, maybe a little bit more, 6 pixels. Yeah, I think this should work. And maybe we can make them darker. No, I don't think it's needed. So this should work. Now let's go back to our app.js and let's calculate this. So how we can calculate the balance? We need to add all the transactions. So here we can do let balance to be 0 before we return all the HTML. And for each transaction, let's do for transaction of transactions. And here we'll do a const so we can define it. And for each transaction, we want to do balance, and we want to do plus, we want to balance equals the previous balance plus transaction price. All right, and now let's use this balance here. So let's use balance. So it's 200, it's 500 minus 300, it's 200, but the cents will not work. We need to grab the cents here. So let's do cents equals, and well, how can we do this? First, I will remove those cents from HTML for now. So it's just 200. And now I would like the balance to be actually 0 and 0, 0. So to do this, I will do balance equals, and balance to fixed, and 2 points after, sorry, fraction digits should be 2. Now I get this 0.00, and this is now string. On the beginning it was number, here it was number as well, but now after running to fixed, this is string. And now we can do that the balance is actually, sorry, first the fraction. So let's do const. We can do const because we will define it only once. Const fraction equals the last 3 characters of the balance. So let's do balance substring, and let's do -3. Let's now test it. Fraction, yes, no, this is wrong. I can't do negatives. So to calculate this, I need to find the dot. I can't do substring. Let's do something like this. I will do balance split, and I will split it with the dot, and I will take the second part. Now it's correct. So because balance is actually this as a string, I will split it with this dot, and I will grab not the 0 part, so the first index, I will grab the second index, so the number 1, because the arrays start with zeros. And now we have fraction, and from the balance, now we can remove the fraction, or we can do the same. We can do balance, but underneath, under the fraction. Balance is actually balance, but let's do split with dot, and let's grab the first item. So now the balance is just 200 as a string. Right, so now this works, and now we get a fully working app.